Welcome back to Impact Show, my 63rd episode. This is getting a lot of fun. 5 years ago, I started this crazy idea of interviewing impactful people that are going against all sorts of odds. And the whole interview started with Marty O'Connor, who got paralyzed from his waist down after a terrible accident. And I asked him about what it's like to face adversity, how to make the impossible possible. And ever since then, I've been interviewing some of the most brilliant minds that have been coming into my life, my career, my politics, all the things and the people that I get to meet. It's amazing. And being able to share that with you. But the adversity part is the biggest thing, because if we all had an easy life, this show wouldn't matter. But all of you are facing adversity right now, and I want to talk about how to address it and overcome it. Like, imagine running for governor in California as a Republican. I mean, what more adversity do you have than that? So it's an honor to have my new friend, Steve Hilton, here in my home to do an interview. I met Steve a few days ago through some mutual friends in the business world, and we talked for 3 to 4 hours about the state, its opportunity. Yes, it has major challenges from a business standpoint, from an environmental standpoint. There's all sorts of negative forces, but there's also positive, and there's outlook. And you see the way that our nation has turned itself around, and you see all the good momentum happening. We still have that opportunity for our state of California. 50 years ago, I was born and raised in Orange County, California, where I'm doing this from, my home in San Clemente. And I'm raising my children now, too. And the California that I was born in and the California that is now are like two different Californias. It went from hope and freedom to disaster. And I'm not here to talk negative about our state government, but what I'm talking about today is how to create a unification around a Republican Party candidate to help breathe some life into the business community, the economic opportunities for the years ahead. So as we sit here in July of 2025, I present to you my new friend, Steve Hilton, who's running for governor. Steve, maybe it'd be great if you could take our audience a little bit about your background and how you ended up here and how you ended up with the decision of running for governor.
Yeah, exactly. What kind of crazy person would do something like that?
That's why I already like you.
I know, exactly. Look, as you can tell immediately from my accent, I'm originally from the UK. I was born and raised there, but my parents are Hungarian, and they fled communism in Hungary so that I could be born in a free country in the UK. But England was a country in rapid decline when I first became aware of politics in the 1970s, just before Margaret Thatcher was elected to turn things around. And in many ways, California today reminds me of England in the 1970s. England was then called, the UK was called the sick man of Europe. And it was plagued by strikes and inflation, and everyone said the politicians, you know, the unions are running everything, and the country's just fallen into stagnation and decline, and forget about the UK. And then Margaret Thatcher was elected, and basically turned it around to the point where by the end of the 80s, it was exactly the opposite. The UK was booming. And to me, that is an absolute inspiration, just as California has always been an inspiration. So we moved here in 2012 with my wife and my 2 sons.
Awesome.
And you know, I've done a bunch of things since moving. I've taught at Stanford University. I founded a tech startup. I've hosted a show on Fox News, written books, done all these amazing things. And had that opportunity to have the California dream. That amazing sense of adventure and possibility that California represents in its very best incarnation. But even before we moved here, that's what I felt about California. And the way I put it is that I was in love with California even before we moved here. And one specific example of that, so the last job I had before moving here was actually in the government in the UK. Most of my career has been in business, but I was working for David Cameron when he was the Prime Minister. I was senior advisor in 10 Downing Street, basically running our domestic reform program. But before he became Prime Minister, and I was really developing our policy plans, there was an article written about the plans that we were developing, and about me particularly, by the Spectator magazine. This is about 20 years ago now. And the headline was California Dreaming. And the theme of the piece was Steve Hilton, David Cameron's policy guru, as he's developing the agenda for the next administration in the UK, is inspired by California and wants to make the UK more like California. And that's exactly right, because we were inspired by this state and everything it represents, ambition and energy and enterprise and startup hustle and dynamism, all those great things, innovation. But that was 20 years ago. And so the question I always ask is there a single political advisor to any leader anywhere in the world that would want to make their country more like California today?
Well, that's fantastic. So that was the precipice. That you became now the Margaret Thatcher of California. I mean, that could be your theme. So that was the tipping point. But what led you to actually move to California? Like, what was the actual reason? Because that's a huge transatlantic transition.
Yeah. Well, my wife. She's still my wife. At the time, my wife, I was going to say my wife at the time, my wife was working for Google, actually.
Okay.
She had a big job at Google. She was Chief Communications Officer. I was working in 10 Downing Street. We have 2 sons, so this is going back 2012 when our second son was born.
Right.
It's just tough on the family. I had this big job in the government. She was traveling a lot to California. The time difference was, so we just felt for the sanity of our family.
Right.
Let's try it out.
Okay.
And so we moved here, not intending necessarily to stay forever. It was just, let's see how this goes, make life a bit easier on us as a family. And so that's when I, found a connection at Stanford, someone I'd worked with in the Obama administration on some policy thing. And so that's what we were doing. And the moment, I do remember actually, it's very rare that you have specific things like this, but I remember the moment that I thought, no, this is it. This is where we're going to be. It was 2016. And I'd gone back to the UK to campaign in the Brexit referendum. So this was just a few months before the Trump populist revolution here in the precursor in many ways was Brexit.
Okay.
In the UK, I had a book out at the time, and it was the paperback edition of a book I'd published in 2015 called More Human, all about how we need to decentralize power. I did an update for the paperback, laying out why I was in favor of Brexit, went back, and I remember landing in San Francisco after the Brexit result. I was there on the night, and just taxiing into the terminal and just looking out the window. I really remember just thinking, oh, it's so great to be home.
Oh, that's wonderful. So
and
your home changed in your heart.
Yeah, and I just kind of caught myself, okay, this is home.
It's a beautiful place.
And that's actually, the way I put it is, it's home, not just literally, but in a deeper way, right? I feel really emotionally, spiritually, in every way, this is where I'm meant to be. Everything that California represents. Right. And it's not just all those kind of, the kind of more economic things we talk about, innovation and all that. There's a spirit of California, the kind of rebel spirit. Like we're going to do amazing things and create things from scratch and just totally challenge the way things are done. That's the spirit that I think, for me personally, is just the heart and soul of California, and that's what that's been crushed lately, and that's what we've got to get back to.
So in 2016, you're feeling your home is here, and I mean, just in a short amount of time, you're now running for governor. I mean, there's no let's start at a city council and work our way up. I mean, you're just going for the top spot. Can you tell me a little bit about that? Because I think a lot of people feel at times like they can't go for that top position.
Okay.
And yet I have friends that are in their 30s that are billionaires because they did go for that top position.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about that and your aspiration for elected office and how you just wanted to go straight to the top and take your approach from England, from business, from elected office in the UK, and then to bring all that knowledge straight from the top as opposed to just going bottom up?
Well, if you look at what I've done since moving here, teaching at Stanford, started a company, and then out of the blue got this offer, like really unexpectedly, to host a TV show. So I'd never done anything in the media. I'd done a few appearances to promote my books, but it was actually going back to the Brexit moment. I was in London for Brexit. Rupert Murdoch, I think, saw me on TV making the argument. It was just around the time when he took over when Roger Ailes was fired as CEO of Fox News, and Rupert Murdoch took over for a brief time, actually running it day to day, and offered me, like, out of the blue.
Just like that?
Yeah, basically.
Wow.
We had, he asked me to lunch, and we had a conversation, and he offered me the opportunity to host a show, which I'd never even imagined I'd end up doing. But that was something that, of course, it's a great challenge, slightly daunting, but, I went for it, and thankfully seemed able to do it. We did well. We had good ratings. Sunday night show, The Next Revolution. And that, I suppose, gives you a sense of a national platform.
Yeah.
You're making an argument nationally. It was a pretty policy and ideas-focused show, rather than the kind of day-to-day. It was a weekly show, so we didn't have to necessarily cover the ins and outs and the minutiae of politics. It was a lot of policy ideas, making an argument. And so I think that a combination of that really drew me back into the world of politics and policy, where, for a good few years I'd been away from that.
Right.
And increasingly, as the years went on, I got more and more frustrated with just critiquing things and complaining about things. I thought, you know what, I actually am drawn back to where I had worked just before moving here in policy and policies. Remember, I'd been the senior advisor to the Prime Minister.
Right.
So in that, and it's I mean, the California economy is bigger than the UK economy, but it's, you know, roughly equivalent in terms of, you know, a political entity.
Sure, yeah.
So I don't have any. I've sat in the cabinet room with the Prime Minister and participated in those kinds of policy discussions. Obviously not the boss, not the elected person as an advisor, but I'm comfortable operating at that level. I'd had some experience operating at that level. I'd led many you know, national scale policy initiatives. I mean, in one sense, one of the things that I tried to do back in this, going back 15 years now, is a version of what Doge was trying to achieve here with the federal government, with the second Trump administration, you know, really attacking bureaucracy and regulation. So I feel like I've operated at that level, and a combination, I suppose, of a national media platform, business experience, government experience at that level, makes me think, yeah, I do have the experience to really try and make the changes that we need here in California. So it's really over a gradual period of years that I found myself thinking, I've got the opportunity to actually try and make this change happen in California.
Right.
So if I've got the opportunity, given that I've had this amazing sense of the California dream since living here, it's really my responsibility to do that. I feel that very strongly.
So there's a tip for our viewers. Communication is key. So he had his own program, and he was able to rise to the top, because even as a commentator, when you were interviewing people, you were probably coming up with solutions for our state in those interviews. So by having a platform, a national platform, like this is my platform, communication skills are really important to leadership. I felt that from the minute I met Steve. It's not just what you say and how you say it, but how, you know, like the energy behind it. I actually heard a client the other day say, oh yeah, we love having Sinan do our PR because he just brings energy in the room. I'm like, but what about my intelligence and the other thing?
No, I totally
no,
get
but
that.
we really love your energy. But like the energy thing is a big one, and I don't really know how.
It's
like,
really, really big,
yeah,
and I get that the
and you
whole
got to
time.
pump people up. You know, you got to get people excited, right? And I think that translates from you, and that's a part of leadership. So now moving into the perspective of our state politics, you look at California.
Yeah.
Talk to our viewers a little bit about your two or three like main points. What's important to you in fixing first and foremost as governor of California?
Well, actually, before I even decided to run for governor, my first kind of attack point on the problems facing California was actually a specific policy issue, and that was housing. And the first work that I did, this is going back a few years now, I set up a policy organization called Golden Together. And the first thing we did was look at the housing crisis, because that is actually the #1 reason people are leaving the state. It's just so expensive to live here. And it affects everyone. It affects business, obviously, because you think, well, if I locate here, then how am I going to get a workforce because they can't afford to live here? On a human level, you know, I hear this all the time. It's heartbreaking. You know, parents, my kids, going to have to leave the state. I'm not going to see my grandchildren. You know, young people, you know, it's just so heartbreaking when young people say, yeah, I want to start my own business and follow my dream. I can't do that in California. It's impossible.
It's impossible.
So the housing thing was the first thing I looked at. And in fact, I spent a lot of time really understanding the issue, talking to all sides of the problem, and basically came to the view that this quickest way to try and address just that single issue was through a ballot initiative dealing with two particular parts of the problem in a focused way. The impact fees that are charged on housing, there's basically a hidden tax on housing, and then this thing called the private right of action under CEQA, which is this environmental law that is abused to block housing on a massive scale. And so I put forward this ballot initiative. We developed the language of a bill with lawyers, and we put it into the Attorney General's office, and we went through the process, but in the end couldn't raise the money needed to actually get it on the ballot. And then that whole process took me to Sacramento to have meetings with legislators and so on, and I started to see what was going on here. And I thought, this place is so broken. It's so bad. And actually, the more time I spent, then once I'm in it, then I'm focusing on housing. And well, actually, it's not just housing. There's the climate policies that are affecting the business climate, and you go on, and you start to see that everything is broken in California, honestly. And these things are connected. And the kind of regulatory problems that are making housing so expensive also make the business climate so terrible, and so on. And so that got me into producing more policy analysis through Golden Together, and then putting all of that together, it turned into a book called Califailure.
Califailure, I saw it.
Reversing the ruin of America's worst run state. And it was really during that process, and at this point, I can't remember the specific moment. I thought, you know what, I don't just want to analyze the problem, I want to actually step up and try and get elected so I can solve it.
Right, right. So let's talk about California as a government and going through that housing initiative that you were working on. You got to see the inner guts of our operations as a state.
Yes.
If you were to have the magic wand and have Doge control in California, what would be some of the reforms that you would take place in the way our state operates?
So I think that one of the most important things came from a story which was unbelievable to me. But I was in the office of one of the state legislators who was known to be good on the housing issue.
Okay.
And we were talking about the policy that I was putting forward. This is right at the beginning of the process. And I remember, and I just need to get a little bit technical here because otherwise this won't make sense. So one of the things that people aren't aware of, we talk about the housing shortage, that supply and demand. The consensus is we need roughly around 3 million or so extra housing units compared to what we have now.
Right.
That's the number that people kind of coalesce around. And then, in fact, Gavin Newsom, when he was running for office the first time for 2018, he promised that sort of scale of house building, and we're way short of that. We're about a third of that has actually happened. But if you look right now, and people blame environmental regulations and zoning and NIMBYs and all this kind of stuff, there's an amazing number, which is that there are over 1 million housing units that have been approved to be built by local governments. They're compliant with all environmental regulations. They've been through the zoning process.
So what's the holdup?
Litigation under this thing called the California Environmental Quality Act, CEQA. Lawsuits filed to block housing. 70% of all CEQA lawsuits are filed against housing.
Right.
Most of those are filed not by environmental groups, but by unions. Unions file lawsuits in order to extract what they call project labor agreements, which involve some combination of mandatory union labor for construction and or what they call prevailing wage, which sounds perfectly reasonable, actually ends up being 4 or 5 times higher than market rate wages. And so you've got two things going on there. Either the development is blocked, in which case it's not built, contributing to higher prices through the shortage, or the blackmail, which is what it is given into. And so you do end up with labor costs that are 4 or 5 times higher than they should be, which also pushes the price up. So that's the background. I'm in the, and that's what our initiative was designed to unblock, by removing the right for anyone to file a lawsuit under that law. This legislator agreed, said, this is fantastic. This would be a game changer if we could do this. I said, fantastic. Let's work on it together, bipartisan, very nice. This person said, yeah, I can't support this publicly. Why not? Well, the unions would hate it.
Exactly.
I said, yeah, but so what? Like, we know that, but why? This is what happened. I'm just going to wave their arm around. We're in an office building above the Capitol in Sacramento, like this, with their hand. Well, the unions run this place. That's a legislator saying that.
Okay, so this is good that you bring this up, because I know you're telling me about some of your
But sorry, can I just say, the reason I mention that is because when you say the foundational problem in California policy across the board is that the unions and other powerful interests, I would add to that trial lawyers and activists on the Democrat side, have captured the levers of power. So that no longer are the people who are elected actually legislating in the interests of the broader public. They're there delivering for the interests that are very narrow. And so the foundational thing we need to change is that. Now, I can't change all of that through the governor's office, but at least I'll bring a bit of balance to that so that we can start to push forward common sense solutions in a practical way.
So bringing up the unions, it seems like anyone running for governor in California are going to have to deal with the 4 largest unions that basically run the power, like you said. What's your vision on how you collaborate with them? Because you got to get them on your side.
Well, I think that you've got to get the right outcomes for people, for the people of California. And so if you just run through the basic facts of what's happening here. I mean, you hear Gavin Newsom and the Democrats more broadly talk about how things are going well because we're the 4th biggest economy in the world. That's true, and I'm proud of that. And I love that we're a big economy, and I think that with my plans enacted, we'll be the 3rd biggest economy, and that's fantastic. But it's not enough just to be a big economy. You've got to be a good economy that works for the people who live here. And I'm thinking now about union members in particular. People who work, teachers and firefighters and construction workers and nurses who tend to be lower paid, right? So right now, they are losing out from these policies. Working people are being hammered by the policies that we've had and the system we've had for so long. From this, it's 15 years now of one-party rule. We've got the highest rate of poverty in the country.
Okay.
There was just a survey from United Way. They do it every 2 years.
Yeah.
35% of Californians cannot afford their basic needs. They talk about that: shelter, food, medical care. It's really tough for regular working people, union members. So my argument is the union bosses, and actually you can add to that, we talk about some of the government workers, look at schools. So the teacher unions who control that with an iron grip. What's happening in our schools? The best predictor of future performance for kids, 4th grade results in math and English and reading and so on. We have the worst in the country, 50th out of 50. We used to be world famous for our education system. Of course, we all understand that's the foundation of opportunity. How are we going to be like a world-beating state here in California if we have the worst? We used to have the best in the world. Now we have the worst in America.
So let's go from the union discussion to the education discussion.
But I just want to say the point is about the workers, the members are being let down by the bosses. So when we talk about the unions, let's even the private sector unions, for example, in the construction industry, who are filing these lawsuits, they think they are, doing strong stuff for their union. What they're actually doing is lifting up the price of housing so much that their own members can't afford to buy the houses that they build. So my whole argument is, for union members, you, more than anyone in California, working people, you need change away from these policies that we've had.
Great. And then so along those lines with education, because I came from a family of educators, and you're right, our education, we're at the worst in the country, yet we have this beautiful state and the 4th largest economy. How do you plan to rewrite the script on our education performance as a state, and talk a little bit about that?
So I think there's 2 parts to that. There's a short term and then there's a medium to long term. So I'll start with the longer term, which is that in the end I've always believed that and just in every sphere actually, certainly in the private sector, that the way you get excellence is through competition. And what we've got now is a monolithic education system, both in terms of the structure, it's basically a public government monopoly in terms of the public school system, but also in terms of attitude and approach. You look at public schools today, it's basically the same as when they were invented in the Bismarck era. In Germany, these kind of factory schools, the same way of doing it, kind of rote learning. And I mean, I'm a good friend of Sal Khan, Khan Academy. Look how that's transformed. In fact, he started a real world school in the Bay Area where I live.
So you went from ed tech to real world.
Well, Khan Lab, exactly. He started a school called Khan Lab School, and we were among the founder parents.
Oh, that's cool.
And so I just think that type of innovation that brings improvement in how you teach and how kids. And the other point is that, any of us who are parents, we know that children are so different. They'd have different attitudes, learn differently. And I wrote about this in my 2015 book, More Human, which is that we've like, the argument of that book is that everything in the world has become too big and centralized and bureaucratic. And we need to make things more human and on a smaller scale. And I think that education is a great example, where it's incredibly centralized, all the same, a monolith. Children learn differently. Some children would benefit from a small school, others thrive in a big school, some are more academic, some are lesser, all of that stuff. You don't get that with the current system. So long term, I think the answer is opening up the school system, and that, of course, is achieved through a mechanism which is very familiar now, which is putting purchasing power in the hands of parents, school choice, vouchers, so that potential providers of education can see that there's parents out there with money to spend.
That's great.
And so you want to set up a school that focuses on science. You're going to get parents who can come to your school. And it's still public education because it's funded by the taxpayer, but there's more choice. That's long term. That is a long-term reform that is not easy to get to. It's not going to happen overnight. It doesn't help you if you're the parent, if you're a Latino family in East LA, working class family in one of the most poorly performing schools in America. All of that I've just described sounds very theoretical. How does that help me now? So in the short term, this is what we've got to do. We've got to hold teachers accountable and schools accountable. Right now, there is no data, there's no accountability. Failure just goes on and on and on. Kids are let down. They leave school without the basics, so they can't thrive in our world. So there's some simple things we can do. A grade for every teacher, a grade for every school, so we can see how they're doing. And then, then we know which teachers are failing, which schools are failing. You can replace the principal. You can, all these things you can do in the short term.
Competition, like you said.
But this is within the current system. You don't need to change. And then one final point on this is the curriculum. So we've been totally diverted down an ideological direction in terms of what is taught in the classroom and what the focus is. And the good news there is that as governor, and this is a broader point about what you can achieve as governor, even without a legislature that's favorable to your views, you do control many parts of the state bureaucracy. The State Board of Education is in the lead on pushing the curriculum. What are they pushing through right now? Something called the Ethnic Studies curriculum, which is going to be mandatory for every high school, even as students are leaving unable to meet the basic standards in English and math. But they're being taught ethnic studies. It's ridiculous. The governor appoints all the members of the State Board of Education. So I can tell you right now, I'm going to kick out all the ideologues. We're going to put in place there common sense, practical people who are going to focus on academic standards in our schools.
So we talked about housing. We talked about union. We talked about education. You've also mentioned taxes. And I think a lot of my entrepreneur friends, a lot of business owners that are watching, it's tough to run a business in California. And I've run my company for nearly 30 years, and it is a constant struggle because of the taxes. I mean, it's an enormous hit every year for small business. And what's your thought on making California desirable for the entrepreneur, the solopreneur, what's driving our economy? And I know my friend Vivek Ramaswamy, who I hosted last week, we did an incredible tennis event with him. You know, what he's about to do in Ohio. Yesterday I had Governor Abbott at Bob Olson's house, and we brought some of our friends there. And, you know, he's just touting about all the incentives that the state of Texas provides businesses. And so much of California moved to Texas, and so much is looking at Ohio. Can you talk a little bit about your business perspective on our state and the crippling tax situation we have for small business, but just taxes in general? Just curious your perspective.
No, I've thought about it a lot, and and talked to Vivek. I mean, he's a good friend. He was there for me on day one for my campaign. I love the idea of Vivek being governor of Ohio and I'm governor of California, kind of out competing each other to make our states attractive.
I do see a similarity in both your leadership.
And so. Look, my personal perspective is as an entrepreneur and business founder, not on Vivek's scale, as I always joke with him. He's done a lot better than I ever did. But, you know, I started companies, a tech company here, a consulting firm in the UK, restaurants. I've started restaurants. That is a tough business. Very, very tough, really tight margins. It's bad enough in the best of times. Here in California, it's the worst of times. And it's not, it is the taxes, I'll get to that in a second, but it's also the ridiculous, regulations, the inspections and permits and nonsense. You know, quick story. I have hundreds of these. Someone who runs a small winery in wine country up in not far from where I live. She was telling me that she put in a new patio, wanted to expand her visitor numbers from 30 a day that was permitted to 50 a day. It took her 6 years and $1 million in lawyers' fees, environmental assessments, this and that, compliance with. And this is a very normal story. So it's the regulation as well, and it's also the litigation. These PAGA lawsuits, Private Attorney General Act, that's basically total extortion by trial lawyers, the biggest donors to the Democrats apart from the unions. So we've got to deal with that as well. But coming to your point about taxation, I want to answer it in two parts because I've really thought about this carefully. And on day one of my campaign, I put out there what I call a pro-worker, pro-growth tax plan. Because we've got to do both things. The pro-worker point is going back to what we said earlier. Working class people are really suffering because it's just so expensive here. One of the quickest ways we can help them and put money in their pockets is a tax cut. And so the first part of my plan, my tax plan, is for your first 100,000 of income, no state income tax. So you remove state income tax. That'll benefit just over 7 million households, thousands of dollars a year. That makes an immediate difference. But of course, we need to, exactly as you're saying, we need to encourage business to locate here instead of driving them away. And there's two parts to it. I think the level of the taxes, but also the complexity. We have endless tax bands. It's insane when you look at our system. It's so complicated. And so the second part of my plan is over $100,000, a flat tax of 7.5%.
Got it.
That makes life much simpler. It's a real incentive to locate here. We're going to get businesses coming back. And then the final part of the story is you may say, well, how are you going to pay for that? I was a fellow at the Hoover Institution, got friends there, ran the numbers for me. And so the cost of that plan right now, and this is static, this is without the dynamic impact of growth and so on, the cost of those two components is an 18.5% reduction in state revenue, which is a lot, it's ambitious, but it takes the state budget back to what it was just before COVID. So this is not some outlandish, insane.
Sure.
This is like just going back to what a Democrat governor had not that long ago. We can do this.
So you brought up regulation and litigation. I like that they rhyme a little bit, but the regulation thing is legit. I mean, it's tough. From Coastal Commission to we have a great friend and associate at Hawthorne that's building modular nuclear reactors.
Yes.
The country, the state is losing its strategic position because of energy,
clean
energy. These are being launched all over the world. China is beating us at that, and that's going to lose our strategic position on AI and powering our transportation to all these new growth industries driving the GDP. Can you talk a little bit about your platform and how you're going to address regulation, litigation, and how you're going to help soften that? Because that also, even if you get businesses here in California, you're still going to hit that ceiling and say, oh, I can't get around this. I'm stuck.
Well, there's a couple of components. The litigation, funny enough, I've spent a lot of time on this, and it's one of the easier ones to fix, interestingly. So a lot of the harassment and extortion is through this thing I mentioned earlier, PAGA, the Private Attorney General Act, which basically empowers trial attorneys. Effectively, it was passed in 2004, and it really outsources the enforcement of California labor law to trial attorneys. It's completely ridiculous. And so you get, every business, you get a letter, and you have to settle because you don't want to go through the process. It's so expensive, and you get these awards of 65 grand, 100 grand. Small businesses, local restaurants getting these all the time. And for bigger businesses, millions of dollars. It's now part of the cost of doing business. Actually, you can deal with that without even changing the law. Because when you look at the details of the law, what you've had there is just an absence from the field of the politicians who handed it over to the lawyers. I will appoint a labor commissioner, because that's your power as governor. You appoint these bureaucrats, a labor commissioner who has the right for any time there's a letter of complaint from one of these lawyers, that you have 65 days for the labor department, the Department of Industrial Relations, to review the case. At the moment, they're not even reading them. They're just letting their lawsuits proceed. I will make sure that we review them, and then you have another 4 months to go back to the business and invite them to respond. And then after that, you have the power to issue a citation to correct whatever problem there is. So by the time you do all of that, the lawsuit just goes away. So you don't even get to it. So that's a change I can make just by appointing pro-business people.
That's great.
So that's a good example. But on the broader point of energy and regulation and all of that, and that's exactly right. We've got to be leading the world. There was a time within living memory when we were absolute world beaters, right? We had the most incredible infrastructure projects in the world. The State Water Project, the freeways, we had the best university. We did world-beating things. Now we can't get anything done. So I really want us to be leading the future in the 21st century, globally. And that means we've got to power it with energy. So it's exactly as you're saying. We've got to get away from this mindset of scarcity, which is like, oh, you can't build anything, can't do anything at the environment, climate. That's what's driving all of this. You need to open all that up. And the way you do that, coming back to the previous topic, is exactly the same, by appointing the right people to these agencies. Because when you actually dig into these policy areas, a lot of the bad stuff, the regulation and the restrictions and all the rest of it, is coming from these bureaucratic agencies. For example, a lot of the environmental regulation is coming from CARB, the California Air Resources Board. I will appoint a new chair of CARB, who's not some climate fanatic, but someone who wants us to have affordable, reliable energy that's as clean and green as possible, rather than what we have now, which is like fake green energy at any cost. They're not even reducing carbon emissions that much. They're just massively increasing cost and complexity for everyone. And so each agency is different. This is where you've got to really understand how it works. The Coastal Commission is a good example. The governor appoints 4 of the 12 members. They serve at the pleasure of the governor. You can make an immediate change there. You look at our agriculture industry. What's driving that industry into the ground? It is the State Water Resources Control Board. You look at our energy, our oil and gas industry. That's being crushed, deliberately crushed, by CalGEM, the agency there. You can appoint new people, get them to give permits for oil fields to expand, and then we can meet our needs here. I mean, the way I always put it is, as long as we're using oil and gas, let's use what we have here rather than importing it.
And I think we talked a lot about the regulation front, but what I like about what you're bringing up is public-private partnerships. So having professionals in industry support your ticket, I think similar to how the President of the United States, and you look at his cabinet, a lot of these are practicing professionals. So to have that sort of public-private partnership is a huge sigh of relief, and I think that's going to really help your agenda. Also like to talk a little bit about what our state's been through in the last year was this fire calamity. So although it happened in Los Angeles County, it affected our whole country.
Yes.
A lot of people lost their fire insurance. It seemed like our governor, our mayor, everyone was caught off guard. What sort of leadership do you bring around the issue of wildfire? And although it seems verticalized, that systematically fractured California just overnight. How do you proactively address that?
So I think it's just a great example of where we just need a bit of common sense. I think one of the underlying critiques I would have of what we've experienced in California is just this endless obsession with ideological posturing rather than practical, common sense problem solving.
Right.
And you really see that in relation to the wildfires, and whether you've got, there's two different contexts at the coastal, in the coastal areas, for example, which is what we saw with LA. It's the sort of low elevation hills, and you get brush and chaparral. But in the Sierras, where you have there are bigger mega wildfires, often through the vast forested areas of our state, it's the same principle, but it's forests rather than chaparral. The same principle is allowing the fuel buildup, and that is entirely the result of extreme environmental policy, which has said we can't have what we used to do forever, which is maintain the environments in a safe and sensible position. Wildfires are a natural part of the climate here, they always have been, but when you let the hills or the mountains become overgrown, that's when they turn into mega wildfires that you can't stop. And so you saw ridiculous things like the Santa Monica Mountains Conservancy, a state agency near the Pacific Palisades, fining people for clearing, who understand how to protect their property, for clearing brush. They were fined for doing things like that. In the Sierras, I think it's almost my favorite example of how lunatic this has all become. So let's just think about what you've got there. You've got forests that are overgrown. They're newly overgrown, because what they've been doing is clamping down on our timber industry, on our lumber industry. So if you look at the numbers, a few decades ago, we would take, it's measured in board feet, right? The amount of timber you take out of the forest. We would take out of the forests in the Sierras about 6 billion board feet of timber. Now that's down to about 1.5. But they've crushed our timber industry in the name of the environment. That means the forests are overgrown, but we're not using any less. We're actually using a bit more. But now we're importing it from Canada on trucks, spewing out carbon emissions. So we've destroyed an industry here, destroying jobs in the Sierras, the timber industry. We're adding to carbon emissions. We're buying timber from overseas, and we're allowing the forest to get overgrown.
So this is why it's so important to understand Steve as a candidate, and why I'm really leaning and supporting you and letting my audience know about you, is because you drew the line just now into a tactical solution on government fracture, business, tactical, ones and zeros binary, to the ideological problems of our state. And that's not just in education, but in environment, in regulation, and all the different topics. That right there makes him a formidable candidate for governor. To be able to connect the ideology to the issue. That's very hard to do, because sometimes people attack the issue, they got all the solutions. Take a candidate in Riverside, a sheriff, that has solutions on crime, okay? But that might just be an issue. But to cover the entire library of our fracture of California, as you did in your book, it's really admirable. But to tie it to the ideology, that's the impossible. And that right there, in my opinion, is how you win as a governor candidate in the state of California. Because I've watched the state and its politics. Sacramento is so far removed from where I'm at in Southern California, it feels like two separate states. And you almost could cut it in half, you know what I mean? But to be able to do that, that's something that speaks across the vein of the state. And one of the really sensitive issues that's happening to our state, and I love your perspective on this, is immigration. So given the fact that we've had immigration reform, obviously there were millions of people coming across the border, being able to vote, being able to get privileges in our state, but not pay into the system, which is fracturing the state. At the same time, our labor relies on individuals that are supporting it, hospitality, construction. What are your thoughts on immigration and some of what's been going on in our state, and how do you carry that into your 2026 agenda?
Well, the first thing I should say is that I'm an immigrant. I'm a proud American, got my citizenship in 2021. My wife, an American now, my two sons, we're incredibly proud Americans. And actually, I'm an immigrant twice over, because my family came from Hungary to the UK. So of course I'm pro-immigration. Americans are pro-immigration. But I've always said this, that public consent for immigration depends on government control of immigration. And when you lose control, which is what's happened in recent years, in particular, of course, under the Biden administration, that's when you see hostility to immigration emerge, and that's what we've seen. And what you've already seen in the Trump administration, they've immediately got control of the border. So I often think of problems in terms of the stock and the flow. right? The flow of topping up the problem, that stopped. We've still got the stock, the
Right.
people who are here illegally. And so this is a really, really complicated issue.
Right.
But I think there are some facts that we need to take into account. First of all, for years I've always, when we talk about unemployment numbers and so on, and of course it's true that we have historically low unemployment right now, but we also, another thing that's historically low is our labour force participation rate. And that's a number I always pay attention to. So the labour force participation rate is like what proportion of working age adults are actually working.
Right.
And right now, it is lower than it's been for decades.
Okay.
It's around 61, 62%. At its peak in California, it was about 69%.
Right.
If we had labour force participation at the level we used to have in California, you'd have about 2 million people working who are not working.
Exactly.
Why are they not working? Because they can afford not to work because of our welfare system. Now let's get very specific. I was up at a dairy in the northern end of the Central Valley the other week. And I was talking to, and these are exactly the kind of jobs we're talking about, right? Farm workers.
Yeah.
I was talking to the farm workers, and here's what they told me. They earn 50 grand a year, something like that. These are not well-paid positions, hard work in the dairy. They told me that their partners, their guys, their partners, girlfriends, make more money than they do.
Interesting.
Through welfare.
Okay.
When you add it all up,
Right.
the EBT cards and food stamps, all this kind of stuff, they make more money than they do who work full time. Now they're fine with it because they end up with money coming into the household, but that is not okay. And I just think it's ridiculous that we're subsidizing people to do nothing and then importing workers from other countries. So of course I want businesses to be successful and have the workforce they need, but let's make sure that our own potential workforce in California, we're doing everything we can to get them into the jobs that need to be done.
Great. Well, this has been a very insightful interview across the issues that I think matter most to our state. The golden age of California is ahead of us. I really believe that in order to make it work, Democrats and Republicans need to work together. I think creating a candidate that can unify parties around issues, but also ideological philosophy.
Yes.
I think there's a lot of Democrats that don't stand behind the ideologies of what's been happening.
Actually, can I just jump in very quickly on that? Finally, when I worked in 10 Downing Street, so it was a Conservative Prime Minister, David Cameron. It was a coalition government. People forget that. It's two parties, parliamentary system. So we were in coalition, the Conservative Party and the party called the Liberal Democrats. I was part of the team that helped negotiate the coalition agreement. I shared an office in 10 Downing Street with my opposite number from another party, Polly Mackenzie. We sat there every day. We deliberately did it to really show that a coalition government could work and we could cooperate. We argued the whole time, but we also worked on getting things done. So that's another aspect of this that, of course, I've got strong points of view about what we need to do, but I do understand that you're going to have a legislature that is almost certainly going to be controlled by the Democrats, and we will have to work together to get things done. There's a lot that I can do unilaterally through the executive branch, but we also want to make lasting change legislatively.
And for our audience, maybe you can share some of the things that are important to you. What are some of the endorsements that you've got? Who are some of your friends so they have a full perspective of what you bring to the platform?
Well, Vivek, obviously, is just someone we've just had a great connection for years, and I'm so proud and honoured to have him with me on day one. And another person in that category is Charlie Kirk.
Oh, wow.
So Charlie Kirk is obviously a huge figure and has made such an impact in American politics. And we've been talking about this for a long time, and he was there endorsing me on day one. And actually, we've been talking about using what he's learned through Turning Point, not just to activate young people, but also he played a really important part in President Trump's victory in terms of the grassroots ground game, particularly in Arizona and Pennsylvania. We've been talking about that. And actually, that is a key to how we win. A lot of people say, well, how are you going to pull this off? How is it possible to win in California? That ground game is a huge part of it. There are enough Republican voters for me to win in 2026. We've just got to make sure they turn out and vote in a midterm election year, and Charlie's got a lot of expertise on that, so that's going to be very important.
Well, that's fantastic. Well, we look forward to continuing to support you. We've got a vast network across the state of California, logical, good-hearted, hard-working people that stand for this sort of agenda. It's really, breathtaking in a way, because we haven't had a refreshed perspective like the one that you provide across all these issues. And I think our state's best days are ahead of it. I really do believe that there is some parallel between our country's agenda and the course that we're on. Just today, the House passed the big, beautiful bill, which has lots of implementations across our country. I do see parts of that bill and some of the ripple effect that will be taking place in California in a positive way. And I really do believe that the next generation is going to hopefully inherit a government that's going to be more unified and address some of these common sense issues. And we're very excited about that.
Can I just say
just
one
like a closing statement? Yeah.
Well, actually, one last thing on that, and I'll say something at the end. But again, it's another really important point, which is imagine how great it will be for the state of California if you have a governor that knows the federal administration and wants to work together with the federal administration instead of constantly fighting and suing the federal government. I mean, half the cabinet, I know that Sean Duffy, Doug Burke, Christina, the people I know, Tom Homan, these are people I've gotten to know over the years. And I'm really excited about working in partnership with the federal government to make things better for us here in California.
So here we brought a state perspective to our Impact Show for all of you to better understand Steve Hilton's campaign and agenda for governor. And these are the type of issues and like-minded people that we will have in Washington, D.C. for our Impact 25 conference at the Hay Adams, October 5th through the 8th. It's all about the new frontier meeting policymakers. It's business-minded people in military and defense, robotics, AI, new frontier, space, venture capital, quantum, fission, all that. Nuclear energy, it's all coming together. That's the new frontier. That's what's driving the GDP. That's what's bringing trillions of dollars in the market and creating jobs for our country. It's been an absolute honor sitting here with you, Steve, and I'm very grateful. A lot of people have had good luck that have been on our show.
Yeah, very good. I love it.
I have a good feeling about this. Thanks so much, and thank you for what you're doing for our state.
Really appreciate it. Thanks.